Stepdad demands rent after I turn 18. He doesn't know I own the house, so here's what happened. Okay, so I'm turning 18 in a couple of months, and let me tell you, life at home has gone from regular boring to weird real fast. Like, it's almost hard to believe, and I still can't wrap my head around it. So here's the deal. I live in a house that used to belong to my dad, Mark. Now, when I say dad, I mean my biological dad, not the guy my mom married later. My real dad passed away when I was just 6 years old. It sucked, but at least he made sure I was set up for the future. He left the house to me, not my mom, but to me. So, technically, I've owned this place since I was a little kid. For a long time, it was just me and my mom, Julia, living here. Things were fine. We had a good routine. I went to school, she worked, and we just did our thing, you know? But then, a couple of years after my dad passed, my mom started dating again, and that's when Brad came into the picture. At first, Brad seemed all right. He wasn't trying to act like my new dad or anything, which I appreciated. He moved in with us when they got married, and we all lived under one roof. Everything was pretty smooth for a while. Like, I didn't really have much to complain about. We weren't super close or anything, but we got along. He'd do his thing, I'd do mine, and that was that. But recently, things have gotten really, really weird. Like, what the hell is even going on kind of weird. So, just a few days ago, Brad sits me down for what he called a serious talk. Now I'm thinking, oh great, what's this about? I figured maybe it was going to be something about house rules or chores or some random thing like that. Nope. What he hit me with was way worse. He starts talking about how I'm going to be 18 soon, which, yeah, obviously I know that. But then he casually drops the bomb. He says that once I turn 18, I should start paying rent if I want to keep living here. I'm sitting there like, wait, what? Did I hear that right? I honestly thought he was joking for a second because who asks their kid to pay rent in their own house? But nope, Brad was dead serious. Now at this point, I'm just confused and kind of mad. This is literally my house. My dad left it to me, not my mom, not Brad, me. So I tell him straight up, the house actually belongs to me. My dad left it to me when he passed away. And you know what this dude does? He laughs. Yeah, he actually laughed like I had just told him the funniest joke ever. I was sitting there dead serious, and he thought I was messing with him. Like, dude, I'm not joking. This is literally the house I grew up in. So I have to explain it all to him again, and at this point, I'm getting frustrated. I decided to go to my mom, Julia, to make sure I'm not losing my mind here. I ask her, Mom, did you ever tell Brad that the house is mine? And get this, she never told him. Like, never. She's been married to the guy for years, and not once did she mention, oh hey, by the way, this house belongs to my son. I couldn't believe it. Brad comes back later, and I have to explain it to him all over again. This time, he doesn't laugh. He finally gets it. The house is mine. The look on his face was priceless, like he was trying to process everything at once. He seemed embarrassed, which, to be fair, is understandable. I mean, how would you feel if you've been living in a house thinking it's your wife's, and then you find out it actually belongs to her kid? But instead of just leaving it at that, Brad tries to justify himself. He's like, oh, I only asked you to pay rent because I thought your mom owned the house, and I was trying to teach you responsibility. Responsibility, he says. Like, I'm not already aware of what's going on in my own life. Sure, Brad, you're really helping me out by asking me to pay rent for my own house. I can tell things are going to get more awkward from here, but I don't back down. I decide to push back a little, see how Brad reacts. The next morning, we're all sitting at breakfast, and the tension in the air is thick. I figure it's now or never, so I drop my own little bombshell. I say, well, since the house is mine, I think it's only fair that you and Mom start paying rent if you want to keep living here after I turn 18. Yeah, I know. It was kind of a power move, but I wasn't going to let him just push me around in my own house. The look on Brad's face, he was completely caught off guard. His mouth actually dropped open for a second before he started sputtering. Wait, what? That's not fair! You can't just expect us to start paying rent? We're family! I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Now he's talking about family? This guy literally sat me down yesterday and told me I had to pay rent in my own house. But suddenly, when the tables are turned, it's unfair? Nah, Brad, you don't get to play that game. I tell him, look, you wanted me to pay rent to live in this house, so it's only fair if you pay rent too. I mean, you're living here, aren't you? He starts getting defensive, saying it's different for adults, and that I shouldn't treat family like this. I just shrugged and said, you didn't seem to have a problem with asking me for rent. Why is it such a big deal now? Things start getting heated. He says I'm being spiteful, that I'm only asking them to pay rent because I'm trying to get back at him for asking me. He storms off before we can even finish the conversation. My mom? She stayed quiet through the whole thing. Later, she pulls me aside and says, I think you're being too harsh on Brad. He was wrong to ask you for rent, but this whole thing is going to tear the family apart if you keep pushing it. I couldn't believe it. My own mom was taking his side, even though he was the one who started all of this. I told her, Mom, if this family gets torn apart, it's because Brad couldn't handle the truth. This is my house. He doesn't get to make the rules. She didn't have much to say after that. Now, we're all just living in this weird, awkward tension. Brad barely talks to me, and my mom just acts like everything is normal. But it's not. It's really not. I can't help but wonder what's going to happen next. Alright, so after that whole rent conversation blew up, things at home got super weird. Like, you could cut the tension with a butter knife. Brad wasn't talking to me, and my mom, Julia, just kind of floated through the house like nothing happened. It was this uncomfortable silence that lasted days, and every time we were in the same room, it was like no one knew what to say. It's not like I expected things to go back to normal right away, but man, this was getting ridiculous. Brad kept giving me these looks, like he was trying to figure out what to say, or maybe just pissed off that I didn't back down. He didn't really try to argue again, but you could feel how annoyed he was. So, I was just doing my thing, trying to keep my head down. But one morning, something strange happened. I was in the kitchen grabbing some cereal, and I overheard my mom on the phone. She didn't know I was there, so she was speaking kind of low, but I caught enough of the conversation to know it was about me. I heard her say, I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. He's not going to understand. No, Brad doesn't want to tell him yet. I froze. My heart was pounding and my mind was racing. What aren't they telling me? I stayed quiet, listening for more, but she must have realized I was nearby because she quickly changed the subject and hung up the phone. I didn't say anything right away, but that conversation stuck in my head for the rest of the day. What could they possibly be hiding from me? I mean, it's not like I had any deep secrets, right? The house was already mine. What else could be going on? Later that evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. So I went up to my mom when Brad wasn't around and asked her straight up, Mom, who were you talking to on the phone this morning? She looked kind of startled, like a deer caught in headlights. She tried to brush it off at first, saying it was just a friend, and it wasn't important. But I could tell she was lying. I pressed her. I heard you say something about me. What's going on? What aren't you telling me? At that point, her face kind of fell. She sat down at the kitchen table and sighed like she knew this moment was coming, but wasn't ready for it. There's something I need to explain, she started. But just as she was about to spill whatever secret she'd been keeping, Brad walked in. Great timing, Brad. He looked at both of us and immediately sensed the tension. What's going on? He asked, his voice sharp, like he was already on edge. My mom just shook her head and stood up, clearly not wanting to have this conversation in front of him. We'll talk later, she mumbled, avoiding eye contact with both of us. I was pissed, like really pissed. What the hell was going on, and why were they both acting like I couldn't handle it? I wanted answers, but of course, I wasn't going to get them tonight. Brad went back to ignoring me, and my mom acted like nothing had happened. The next day, I decided I wasn't waiting around anymore. I needed to figure out what they were hiding. So I started paying more attention, watching their little interactions. And that's when I noticed something weird. Brad had been acting strange, not just avoiding me, but doing things like sneaking around when he thought I wasn't looking. I caught him going through some papers in my mom's office. At first I thought it was nothing, but the more I saw it, the more I realized he was digging through stuff that had to do with the house. Why was Brad suddenly so interested in the house paperwork? It got even stranger when I saw him meeting with some random guy at a coffee shop a few days later. I followed him. Yeah, I know. Not my proudest moment, but I was curious. They were sitting there, looking all serious, talking in low voices. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough to know something was up. Brad handed the guy some papers. It looked like he was signing something. What the hell is Brad up to? I went home fuming. I was tired of the secrets, the lies, and all the sneaking around. I didn't care if it was Brad or my mom. I was going to confront both of them. That night, I waited for the right moment. We were all sitting around the dinner table, not talking as usual, and I decided enough was enough. So, Brad, who was that guy you met at the coffee shop earlier today? I blurted out, staring him dead in the eye. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. He looked at me like a deer in headlights. What are you talking about? He stammered. You know what I'm talking about. I saw you with that guy. You were giving him papers. What's going on? I wasn't backing down. I wanted answers. My mom's face went pale. She looked between the two of us, clearly not expecting this bomb to drop at the dinner table. Brad tried to brush it off, saying it was nothing, just some business stuff, but I wasn't buying it. I slammed my hand down on the table. I'm not stupid, Brad. This isn't just business stuff. You've been acting shady for weeks now, and I know you're hiding something. What the hell is going on? That's when my mom finally cracked. She started crying, which threw me off because she hardly ever cries. She looked at me and said, Lucas, we didn't want to tell you like this, but the house isn't as secure as you think. I was confused. What do you mean? She wiped her tears and continued. Your dad left the house to you, yes, but there's something we didn't tell you. The mortgage wasn't fully paid off. There's still a significant amount of debt on the house, and we've been struggling to keep up with the payments. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. What? Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Brad chimed in, clearly uncomfortable. We didn't want to worry you, especially with everything coming up like your 18th birthday and all. I've been trying to figure out how to handle it without involving you, but it's complicated. Complicated? That didn't even begin to cover how I was feeling. Suddenly, everything made sense. Brad's weird behavior, my mom's cryptic phone call, the tension. They were both trying to figure out how to deal with this massive debt hanging over my head, and they hadn't told me any of it. I sat there in stunned silence as my mom tried to explain more, but honestly, I wasn't listening anymore. All I could think about was how everything I thought I knew about my own house, my own life, had been a lie. So after that huge reveal about the mortgage and the debt, I was feeling completely thrown off. I mean, 1 second, I thought I had everything figured out. This house was mine. End of story, right? But now, I'm sitting there realizing that it's way more complicated than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about Brad being shady anymore. This was about the house itself, my future, and honestly my whole life turning into a mess I didn't sign up for. That night, I barely slept. I was lying there in my bed staring at the ceiling, just replaying everything over and over in my head. The whole thing about my dad leaving the house to me? Well, yeah, that part was true. But now there's this massive debt hanging over my head. And apparently, no one thought to tell me until it was too late. My mom and Brad had been struggling with the payments for God knows how long, and instead of coming to me earlier, they just let it pile up. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get to the bottom of this. So I sat down with my mom again, this time without Brad around. I needed some straight answers from her. Okay, Mom, explain it to me. How much debt are we talking about? How far behind are you guys on the payments? I asked, trying to stay calm. But inside, I was a mix of anger and anxiety. She looked so uncomfortable, like she didn't want to answer, but I wasn't letting her off the hook this time. She sighed and said, Lucas, it's about $80,000. We've been behind on the payments for almost a year now. My jaw practically hit the floor. $80,000? How the hell do you let it get to that point without saying anything? Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I've been living here thinking everything's fine, and now you drop this on me? I didn't want you to worry, she said, which honestly pissed me off more than it helped. Like, yeah, great, Mom. Let's just wait until I'm 18 and drop an $80,000 bomb on my lap. That'll make everything easier. I'm old enough to handle it, I told her. You should have told me when things started going south. She didn't have much to say after that. Just more of the same, we didn't want to burden you stuff, which frankly didn't cut it anymore. Then I realized something even worse. Was Brad trying to fix this whole situation by himself? Like, is that why he was sneaking around with paperwork? I had a bad feeling about this, so I decided to confront him. I caught him later that day while he was in the garage messing with his car. I walked right up to him, not wasting any time. Brad, I need to know what you've been up to. I saw you meeting that guy, giving him papers. What are you doing about the house? He looked at me like he'd been caught, which he totally had. He fumbled around with his words for a bit before saying, I'm just trying to figure things out, Lucas. I'm trying to fix this. Fix this how? What's your plan? I pressed, because I knew damn well he didn't have some miracle solution. Brad finally came clean, and what he said made my blood boil. I've been looking into getting a second mortgage or refinancing the house to cover the debt, he said. Excuse me? A second mortgage? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're going to dig us into even more debt? Are you insane? He tried to justify it, saying it was the only way to keep the house, but I wasn't buying it. That's a terrible plan, Brad. You're just kicking the problem down the road. We're already drowning in debt, and you think taking out more is going to solve anything? He didn't have an answer. Of course he didn't. I could see in his face that even he knew it was a stupid idea. But he didn't know what else to do. I was so mad, I just walked away. I needed to clear my head. I grabbed my jacket and left the house, just wandering around the neighborhood for a while, trying to make sense of everything. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This whole mess could have been avoided if they had just told me sooner. Now, I'm stuck trying to figure out how to dig out of an $80,000 hole with no real plan. I spent the rest of the day just thinking about what to do. Part of me wanted to sell the house and get out from under all the debt, but at the same time, this was my house. My dad's house. The thought of selling it felt like giving up, like letting go of the one thing my dad left me. I couldn't do that. But keeping it meant dealing with all this financial crap I wasn't ready for. That night, I sat down and started looking into my options. I Googled everything I could about mortgages, debt relief, selling houses, whatever I could find that might give me a way out of this mess. It was overwhelming, and honestly, I felt like I was drowning in information. But one thing became clear. I couldn't trust Brad to handle this. He was only making things worse, and I had to take control before he dragged us even deeper into this disaster. The next day, I called a financial advisor. Yeah, I know, sounds super grown up, right? But I figured if anyone could help me figure this out, it was someone who actually knew what they were doing. I explained the situation about the debt, the mortgage, everything. The advisor laid it all out for me, saying I had two real options: either sell the house and pay off the debt, or try to negotiate a payment plan to keep the house and slowly chip away at what we owed. Neither option was great, but at least now I had a clearer picture of what I was dealing with. I thanked the advisor and hung up, feeling a little better, but still totally stressed. Later that evening, I sat down with my mom and Brad again. This time, I had a plan. I told them straight up, "We're not taking out a second mortgage. That's just going to make things worse. We either need to sell the house or figure out a payment plan with the bank." Brad didn't like hearing that. He still thought his half-baked idea of refinancing was the best move, but I shut him down. "I'm not letting you drag us even deeper into this. We're doing this the right way." My mom didn't say much. She just nodded, probably realizing that I was right. Brad grumbled, but eventually he gave in. He knew there was no other option. We ended the conversation there, with a loose plan to talk to the bank and try to negotiate something. It wasn't perfect, but at least it felt like a step in the right direction. But even with that, the weight of the situation still hung over me like a cloud I couldn't shake. So, after deciding we weren't going down Brad's stupid route of taking a second mortgage, we had to face reality. That meant dealing with the bank. Not gonna lie. The idea of sitting down with a bunch of people who probably talk about finances for breakfast made me want to throw up. But I knew we didn't have a choice. This was it. We either get a grip on the situation, or everything's going to fall apart. The day of the meeting was tense. My mom had been quiet ever since we agreed on the payment plan idea. I could tell she was stressed, and honestly, I didn't blame her. Brad was still acting like this whole thing wasn't as serious as it was. He kept saying stuff like, "We'll figure it out," like it was some minor inconvenience. But $80,000 isn't just something you figure out. That's life-ruining debt. We headed to the bank that afternoon. It was one of those fancy-looking buildings with glass everywhere, and everyone inside was wearing suits, which immediately made me feel out of place. I mean, here we are, a family drowning in debt, walking into a place that looks like it deals with millionaires. Not a great vibe. We sat down with this advisor dude, Gary, who looked way too relaxed for what we were about to talk about. He was polite, but you could tell he's done this 1,000 times. Meanwhile, I was sweating bullets, and Brad was acting like it was some casual coffee meeting. Gary opened up a laptop and started asking questions. "So, you're behind on your mortgage payments?" he said, looking up at us with this neutral face. I nodded. My mom stayed quiet, and Brad jumped in. "Yeah, we've been trying to catch up, but it's been tough." "Can you explain the situation?" Gary asked, typing something on his laptop. I was sick of Brad trying to handle everything, so I cut in. "We're $80,000 behind and the house is in my name. My dad left it to me, but no one told me about the debt until recently." Gary gave me a sympathetic look but didn't stop typing. "I see. So what's the goal here? Are you looking to negotiate a payment plan, or are you considering selling the property to cover the debt?" That's when the reality really hit me. There were no great options. We were either going to be paying off this debt for years, or I'd have to give up the house. Either way, my life was going to be completely different. Brad, as expected, started talking about the payment plan option like it was the only way forward, but I wasn't ready to make a decision just yet. "I don't want to jump into anything without knowing the details," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "What would a payment plan look like?" Gary nodded and pulled up some numbers. "It depends on how much you can afford each month, but typically with this kind of debt, you'd be looking at payments over the next 10, 15 years, assuming you can't make a large lump sum payment up front." 15 years. That's how long I'd be paying for this mistake. It felt like a punch to the gut. And if we sell the house? I asked, even though I already hated the idea. This was my dad's house. Selling it felt like losing the last piece of him I had. If you sell, you'd need to ensure the sale covers the remaining debt, plus any fees associated with the process. It might clear the debt, but you'd walk away with nothing, depending on the market value, Gary explained. Great. So either way, we were screwed. Brad, still acting like everything was no big deal, leaned back in his chair and said, I think the payment plan's the way to go. We can handle it. Right, Julia? My mom hesitated, looking at me like she didn't know what to say. I knew she was leaning towards the payment plan too, but she didn't want to say it because she knew how much this house meant to me. I could feel the pressure mounting, everyone waiting for me to make the final call. But I wasn't going to rush into this. We're going to need some time to think about it, I told Gary. He nodded and said he'd send us some options to review. We left the bank, and the car ride home was dead silent. I didn't even know what to think anymore. The weight of it all was suffocating. Brad, of course, couldn't keep his mouth shut. As soon as we got inside the house, he started going on about how we should just go with the payment plan and stop dragging things out. We can't afford to waste time, he said, like I didn't already know that. I snapped, Brad, you're not the one who's going to be stuck with this debt for 15 years. It's my house, remember? He tried to backtrack, but I wasn't having it. You've been making decisions without me for months, and look where it's gotten us. I'm not letting you bulldoze through this like it's your call. My mom finally spoke up, trying to calm things down. Lucas, we'll figure this out together. We're all in this, okay? I appreciated that she was trying to be supportive, but it didn't change the fact that I was the one stuck in the middle of this mess. They could walk away if they wanted to. I couldn't. That night, I stayed up late again, staring at my computer screen, trying to find some sort of answer. I looked at the numbers over and over, trying to figure out how we could make it work. But every time I thought about making those payments for 15 years, it made me sick. And then, in the middle of the night, an idea hit me. What if I didn't sell the house, but rented it out instead? It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, I could keep the house in my name, pay off the debt with rental income, and still hold on to the last piece of my dad's legacy. I started doing research, diving into websites and forums about renting properties. It wasn't going to be easy. There were a lot of legal steps I'd have to take, and I'd need to find tenants fast. But it felt like the best shot I had at saving the house without drowning in debt. The next morning, I told my mom about the idea. What if we rent the house out? We could live somewhere smaller, cover the mortgage with the rental payments, and still keep the house. She looked surprised, but didn't shut it down. It's a lot to take on, Lucas. Being a landlord isn't easy. Are you sure about this? I don't know, I admitted. But I think it's better than selling it or being stuck in debt for the next 15 years. Brad, predictably, wasn't thrilled. You're going to trust strangers to live in this house? What if they wreck the place? I ignored him. This wasn't his decision anymore. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it felt like the only option that gave me a chance to hold on to something. I wasn't ready to let go of my dad's house, and if renting it out was the way to keep it, I'd do whatever it took. After I came up with the idea to rent out the house, things started moving fast. Like, faster than I thought they would. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing at first. I spent hours on Google looking up how to be a landlord, how to find tenants, and all that stuff. It's kind of crazy how complicated it is. I thought you just put up a for rent sign and boom, you're done. Nope, there's way more to it. First off, I needed to figure out how much rent I could actually charge. I had no idea what the going rate was, so I started looking at similar houses in the area. Some of them were renting for way more than I expected, which was kind of a relief. I was hoping that if I could charge a decent amount, we'd be able to cover the mortgage payments without too much trouble. But I also knew I couldn't just throw out a random number and hope for the best. I had to be smart about this. I sat down with my mom to talk about it. Brad was out, so it was just the two of us. I explained everything I'd been researching, how much we might be able to get for the house if we rented it, and what that would mean for us. She listened quietly, nodding along, but looking a little unsure. I don't know, Lucas, she said finally. It sounds like a lot of work. What if something goes wrong? What if we can't find good tenants? I get it, Mom, I said, trying to stay calm. But this feels like the only way to keep the house. I don't want to sell it, and I definitely don't want to be paying off debt for the next 15 years. This is our best shot. She sighed and looked around the house, like she was trying to picture someone else living here. I knew it was hard for her. She had memories in this place too, even though it wasn't technically hers. It was where she raised me, and where she'd been with my dad before he passed. I could tell she didn't want to let it go either. Okay, she said after a long pause. Let's try it. But we need to be careful, Lucas. This could get tricky. So with her on board, I got to work. I started getting the house ready, cleaning it up, fixing small things that I hadn't noticed before, just trying to make it look as nice as possible. Brad, of course, wasn't exactly thrilled about the whole thing. He kept making snide comments like, "Oh, you're going to trust random people in your house?" Or, "Good luck being a landlord, Lucas. Hope you're ready for all the headaches." I ignored him. At this point, Brad's opinion didn't matter to me. He had done enough damage by trying to make decisions behind my back. This was my plan now, and I wasn't going to let him mess it up. After about a week of prepping the house, I listed it online. I wasn't sure what to expect. Like, would anyone even be interested in renting it? But within a few days, I started getting messages. People wanted to come see the house. I couldn't believe it. Maybe this plan was actually going to work. I set up a few showings, and honestly, meeting potential tenants was a weird experience. Some people were super nice and seemed like they'd take care of the place. Others, not so much. I had this one guy who showed up late and looked like he hadn't showered in a week. He didn't even take his shoes off when he came in, just stomped around the house like he was doing me a favor by being there. Yeah, hard pass on that guy. But then there was this young couple, Sam and Jess. They were probably in their late 20s, newly married, and looking for a place to start their life together. They were polite, asked a lot of good questions, and seemed really interested in the house. After they left, I had a good feeling about them. A few days later, I called them up and offered them the place. They were thrilled and agreed to move in by the end of the month. I couldn't believe how smoothly everything was going. It felt like maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. But, of course, nothing can ever be that simple, right? About a week before Sam and Jess were set to move in, I got a call from the bank. My stomach dropped the second I saw the number on my phone. It was Gary, the guy we'd met with about the mortgage. He sounded serious. "Lucas, I've been reviewing the paperwork for your property, and I'm afraid there's something we need to talk about," he said. Great. Just when I thought I had everything under control. I went down to the bank to meet with him, and that's when he dropped the real bomb on me. Apparently, there was a lien on the house. Basically, my mom had taken out a loan against the property years ago, right after my dad died. I had no idea. She never told me. And the worst part? The amount owed on the lien was nearly $50,000, on top of the $80,000 mortgage debt we were already dealing with. I was speechless. I mean, how do you even process that? We were already in way over our heads, and now there's another $50,000 hanging over us? I went home that night and confronted my mom. "Why didn't you tell me about the lien? We could have been dealing with this a long time ago, but you kept it from me. Now we're even deeper in debt, and I don't know how we're going to get out of this." She looked devastated, like she knew she'd messed up but didn't know how to fix it. "I'm sorry, Lucas," she said quietly. I was scared. I didn't want to lose the house, and I thought I could handle it. But then everything spiraled out of control. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was furious. How could she keep something like that from me? But another part of me felt sorry for her. She was just as overwhelmed as I was, maybe even more. But that didn't change the fact that we were now staring down a $130,000 debt, and renting the house wasn't going to be enough to cover it. The next few days were a blur. I felt like I was stuck in quicksand, sinking deeper and deeper no matter what I did. I kept thinking about my dad, about how hard he worked to give me this house, and now it felt like it was slipping away piece by piece. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. I didn't know how we were going to fix this, but I knew I had to keep fighting. This house was more than just a building. It was my connection to my dad, my future, and everything I'd worked for. And I wasn't going to let it go without a fight.